Again, I'm Shannon Ellsworth. I serve on the Provo City Council and I work for Sunrise Engineering. And this is my partner in crime.
Hi, I'm Gabriella Lawson. I led one of the largest nutrient experiments ever on Utah Lake over the past few years, and I'm with BYU, so.
Excellent. So when we do our panel, we have what Ben calls a Mondo panel, and you can see we have experts from various fields, and as we ask questions, we won't ask each of them to respond to each question, but we will target individuals with certain questions that are related to your expertise. Now I'm going to turn the time over to Gabriella for introductions of our panel members.
All right, so for our panel members, we have Chris Keleher. He's the Director of Species Recovery at the Utah Department of Natural Resources. Next, we have Andrew Follett. He's a student at Yale. We have Mayor Julie Fullmer. She is the mayor of Vineyard, and she chairs $360 million investment board that revitalizes and cleans the environment. We also have Eric Ellis. He's the executive director of the Utah Lake Commission. Jamie Barnes is the Sovereign Lands Program Administrator for the Utah Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. We also have Jacob Holdaway. He's a 6th generation farmer along the shore of Utah Lake, and he founded the Walkara Way project. We also have Representative Brady Brammer. He is the state representative from District 27. And he is the sponsor for the Utah Lake Authority. We have John Mabey next to him. He is a water law attorney with the firm Mabey, Wright and James. He represents many clients with interests connected to Utah Lake. And we have Chief Executive Meyer. She is the great-great-granddaughter of Chief Walkara and Chief Arapian, and on her mother and father's side, and she is the Chief Executive of the Timpanogos Nation. And lastly, we have our wonderful Dr. Ben Abbott. He's a professor of aquatic ecology at Brigham Young University, and he's worked on many different water quality issues.
So real quick, we want to thank our sponsors for creating and facilitating this incredible event. We want to recognize the Environmental Ethics Institute at BYU, Big Monocle, Sunrise Engineering, New Skin, Rio Tinto, Clyde Snow, Utah Valley Chamber, Utah Valley Earth Forum, Conserve Utah Valley, Brigham Young University, Utah Valley University, and the National Science Foundation. So thank you to our sponsors. Let's get started.
All right, our first question is, how would islands impact landowners and business owners?
I guess it was dependent upon where the islands were situated, if they had businesses themselves on them, if they had houses on them, and if the traffic was done well. So if you were able to pull traffic in properly. I think that if it wasn't done well and the traffic didn't circulate properly, it could, be an inhibitor to the community. But if it was done well, it might make the wind cycles better for people who were living there. It might raise the values of the houses along the lakeshore. We have public lakeshore properties, and I think that value would probably increase. I think it would probably draw more businesses towards the area, because if you were making those islands more accessible for the lake users, then it would draw people to a destination spot and it would increase their businesses. That's my guess. Okay. It's not there, so it's a guess.
That's a guess. Any other comments on that one? Representative.
Well, one of the things with the islands is it can depend on, kind of like what Mayor Fullmer said, if there's development on the island or not. Quite a few of the proposals on the islands are basically bird islands that would be a habitat for birds and other migratory species. Now, one of the things that we deal with on the lake is people don't realize how big it is, and it's a very turbid lake, and the sediment the wind patterns kind of have an impact on the sediment and stir it up quite a bit. And to some degree, islands can act as a windbreak and help to quell some of the turbidity in a high wind environment. And so that can increase the safety on the lake a little bit as well. It provides some breaks for people to, where they're not out in the middle of nowhere, there is somewhere to go. There's 2 or 3 deaths each year on the lake. But I don't know for the businesses I think that we need to have more specifics, and I don't think we're anywhere close to having exactly what the specifics would be for anything like that. But there are, as far as the impact, it would change your experience on the lake a little bit.
Thank you for sharing. So our next question is, who owns the lake bed? And someone with political or legal expertise can help us answer this.
Okay, so this is an easy one. I'll pop in. The state of Utah owns the bed of Utah Lake. When Utah became a state in 1896, it gained ownership of all of the beds of the navigable and commercially productive or meaningful bodies of water, like Utah Lake. This issue was litigated for the United States Supreme Court in 1987. The court said, certainly the state owns the bed of Utah Lake, and ownership of the lake is an essential attribute of sovereignty.
And I'll just add to that, that Forestry, Fire, and State Lands manages Utah Lake as sovereign lands for the state of Utah.
Thank you guys for those responses. Our next question is a science water quality question. It is, if islands are built in Utah Lake that are developed for residential and commercial use, would that development pose a threat to Utah Lake water quality?
Yeah, I think that this is similar to Andrew's question, very easy to answer. If you were to split up the lake into multiple basins, and especially if you were to substantially deepen the lake, I see almost no scenario where that wouldn't increase the severity and risk of having these really bad water quality issues, particularly with deoxygenation of the water. And I know that the proposal does acknowledge that fact and then proposes to use machines, bubblers and other machines to solve this problem. So it seems kind of backwards to me, where we have an ecosystem now that's incredibly resilient, and then they're proposing to change it, make it much more vulnerable to the kinds of pressures we're putting on it, and then are adding a very costly and complicated solution to the problem that they're creating.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Abbott. Here's a question that comes up quite a bit. Let's get this out of the way. How likely is it that the island proposal moves forward, and how likely is it that the road or bridge proposal moves forward?
So I can take that question from Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. So currently we have been evaluating a proposal from the Utah Lake Restoration Group. That proposal's been with our division since 2017. Currently we are having conversations with that applicant, and the applicant is moving forward through the federal process to do an EIS on that proposal. So there's a state side and there's a federal side. And so that proposal is currently moving forward on the federal side that we're aware of, and the state process is currently in the proposal phases with Forestry, Fire, and State Lands.
Is that a bridge or
Thank you.
proposal that you answered?
It's islands, but we call it the Utah Lake Restoration Project is what the project is.
Okay. Is there any additional insight on that, or on the proposed? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add the Division of Water Quality perspective. We will be issuing the 401 water quality certification that was mentioned earlier as part of that 404 permitting process. And at this stage, we haven't seen enough detail on the project to make any sort of conclusions about impacts, either beneficial or otherwise, to water quality. We'll of course be looking at wastewater, we'll be looking at stormwater runoff. We're very interested in the changes in the shape of the lake and how that might affect potential stratification or circulation. All of those elements will be something we look closely at as we evaluate that proposal. But right now we don't have enough information to make any sort of general conclusions.
The causeway is just under discussion right now, so it's not formally on the 2040-60 transportation plan, but it's something that's constantly in discussion as the state tries to determine how to move people through the state and how to adapt with the growth that's going to be coming here. So you'll see it as a preliminary discussion on the transportation plan, and I believe right now it's looking like it's going down to the regional airport from the opposite side of the lake.
All right, thank you for all your responses. Our next question is, how are indigenous groups for whom Utah Valley represents their ancestral lands being involved in conversations regarding stewardship of the lake? And we'll pose this question to Chief Executive Meyer.
I don't really know how involved the other tribes in Utah are. We didn't know about this until Mr. Abbott notified us. So I don't know how involved everybody else is, but this is our first step at being involved. So I think there needs to be more involvement.
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Go for it.
What is the typical involvement that happens with Native groups and people and public engagement? Is it when it comes to sovereign lands and state authorities? How does it just typically go through the public engagement process, or is there a different route that comes from that discussion?
I think a lot of times that depends on the jurisdiction, whether it's municipal, county, state, or federal. Is there any other comments from this panel?
I would say it's extremely hard to engage or reach out just because sometimes their history was whitewashed or not. It's very hard, it's very difficult to get to. So with the help of grassroots people just making phone calls to different tribes and trying to see, do they have any history here? What do they have? Is there anything written? Can they prove? So with the Walkara Way project, what we've tried to do is just make as many phone calls, have as many meetings, and one of the main reasons why we named our project the way we did is that we were shocked. I was shocked when I started that their history wasn't well represented in just a short amount of time. And so when I was in 5th grade, I took Utah history, and Chief Walkara was a hero to me, and I would always go down to the lake and build a wiki up just like him. And everyone has a part of Utah Lake, and you just need to make sure everyone's well represented. So I would say if they are underrepresented, every government entity that I've engaged in have always had a very open, let's make sure that they're involved. But I would say it's hard to make sure that they are represented, and we need to seek them out and hear their voice.
To that point, there are no, in major federal regulatory regimes, obligations to engage tribes or other groups. There are public comment periods, but people are sort of obligated to organize by themselves. Similarly, at the state level, engaging tribes is a matter of policy design. So when these decisions are being made now about how we're going to regulate the lake, who's going to make those decisions and so forth, it has to be a decision in the legislature, or in some cases maybe administrative bodies. But in other words, there's no rule that says we have to make these good choices, and that's why pressure on key policymakers is critical.
Excellent, thank you. So the next question is a scientific question. The question is, the ecological restoration can be a long process. What is a realistic benchmark goal for the end of this decade? And how can citizens help expedite the process?
I'll only take this because I think that the others are unmuting themselves, because that's a fabulous question. We are used to short-term fixes, and these ecological systems take decades and even centuries to respond, right? I think several of the presentations mentioned that there could have been several state changes in the lake. In ecology, that means that the whole food web, the whole hydrology has changed to a new configuration. And so we can't expect, there are two misconceptions that I often see. One is sometimes we're trying to restore to a state that never existed in the past. That's a big problem, right? If we call it restoration, but really it's transitioning into something new. Number two is when we have efforts that are working, it takes a long time for that to show. And so I think a lot of the frustration that people have, hey, why haven't we cleaned up the algal blooms? For me, it's not surprising at all, right? This is going to be a multi-decadal investment that we make to restore the water flow, to reduce the extra nutrients going into the lake, and then allow the ecosystem to recover. It's not something that can be accomplished on a 4-year legislative time frame. And we need to be aware of that and also help others realize it.
Why don't we hear about an example of restoration that's currently occurring at Utah Lake and a success that we're seeing in the last 10 years?
I'm going to be presenting after this panel.
So I can try to take a crack at that. For remediation of algal blooms, there's sort of several elements, one of which is controlling the nutrient loads or the nutrient pollution that's coming into the lake to begin with. It is true that the lake is retaining a lot of that, but what's left is driving these algal blooms. So a lot of our focus has been on the watershed, working to reduce nutrient pollution into the lake to begin with. There are other elements that perhaps Chris could speak to with respect to the ecological restoration on the fish side, habitat, Phragmites removal, etc.
Yeah, I was gonna respond. The June Sucker Recovery Program has really had a focus to restore aquatic vegetation, natural aquatic vegetation in Utah Lake. And part of that has been removal of carp that are a non-native species out there that disrupt aquatic vegetation. And with the carp there, as you saw in Dr. Brahney's presentation, the lake shifted to an algae-driven state as opposed to being driven by primary productivity driven by aquatic plants. So there's been efforts, and we have seen some ecological response to our carp removal and some plants coming back in the system, but not to the extent that we really had hoped to see.
Maybe just from a municipal standpoint, I think cities are probably doing a lot as they surround the communities. I know for our community, we work on a lot of remediation, restoration, and then revitalizing the lake. And that's, for us, I have the Geneva Steel Factory that used to be in my community, so that's removing trace metals, things like that, building those wetlands along our lake shore to capture the nutrients that are going in, trying to get that secondary water. And then that restoration, well, and with that, removing the invasive species, things like that. And then the restoration is making sure we're using less water, making sure we're using different types of plants in our communities, coming up with a kind of a conservation mindset within the community, and then revitalizing it, doing things that draws people back to the lake and utilizing the lake and reminding them about why they care about the lake. So I think most cities are probably using that formula in some way. Whether it's enough or as innovative as ideas about getting out onto the lake and floating islands or islands themselves, not from a city standpoint.
I would also, like, talking about success on the lake, I've been involved in government entities for my entire career, and the vast majority is not seen by the general public. And so, you know, I've obviously engaged all 25 government entities that touch the lake, and I can't tell you how much is happening behind the scenes. There's a lot of thought, and there's a lot of great leaders. What I've recognized is conversations and is really are happening, and they didn't happen before. So even though it's not like an end like project, you have to first start with a dream, I guess that you'd say, and then obviously bringing that dream together that encompasses 25 government entities to make sure it's a master plan. So I'm positive on the lake, like extremely positive, because when I see the difference, whether it be water quality or lands, or there's a lot of positive things that are happening. So.
Great, thank you guys. A follow-up question to that is, how do we influence government agencies?
So I think I'm the only there's a few non-government entities. I would say sometimes we have this fictitious idea in our brain that we are not allowed to engage in our government or petition them or ask questions. And I would just say that our governments have an open book, and they are underfunded and understaffed. Our government employees are, and they're under siege sometimes. And so understanding that and trying to understand their perspective first of what they're trying to accomplish. I'm a citizen, like that's how I got here, right? But what I would say is do your homework and then plan out years in advance. Like, it's going to take time, and have the patience, But also I would say be respectful. Like, understand that they all have their different specialties, you know, water, air, agricultural. So they're coming from a very different perspective. But listening, you can move the ball forward. So that's what I would say. And that's why I think that the symposium is a great thing, is you're bringing it together to listen to each other.
Thanks for sharing that. Most elected officials are not full-time, they are part-time. And the two up here on this panel, can you tell us what's a positive or effective way that citizens can interact with you?
You know, for me, probably the easiest way to contact me is by email, Brammer, so BBRAMMER @le.utah.gov, and it's on the legislative website. I'm more than happy to engage with anyone. During the session, it's usually my intern who's engaging because we're kind of getting swamped. But outside of session, it usually takes me between 24 and 48 hours to get back to you. And I'm pretty good, especially about Utah Lake stuff. It's a passion of mine, and I care deeply about it. I grew up staring at the lake, wondering what else it could be. Like, what more could it be? Because, you know, I'd go down there and it was kind of gross, and I didn't think it was okay for it to be like that. And so now that, you know, I grew up here in Orem, went to junior high, just, you know, Lake Ridge Junior High, just like right there. And so when I joined the legislature and I started to look at what could I do, you know, Utah Lake was a big part of something that I felt like I could have a positive influence on. And so I want to interact with you on it. You know, I have the bill on the Utah Lake Authority, and I have been pleading with anyone who likes it, doesn't like it, wants it changed, or anything, to just talk to me about it. And I've gone, you know, I think I've met with every city mayor, council, manager, and at least one of those from every city. I've been to I've worked with all the water groups. I've been trying to work with everyone that I possibly can to get us, to get as much input, because I know that there's not one person smart enough to figure out Utah Lake. We need as much input as possible. And so, you know, reach out by email probably is the most effective for me.
Yeah, and I'll just speak generally. I think political efficacy is pretty high in the state. If you reach out to your representatives, they're going to write back and they're going to respond. And if they don't, especially for a municipality, you can just show up at a city council meeting and speak in the public forum, you know? And that's a great way to interact with people. But it's also, we get emails so much every day, and I hand out my cell phone like it's candy. So most people are texting me, and sometimes I have 152 texts that I have to catch up on, but we're there and we're listening, and you can definitely reach me at any time, and you can just look online or talk to me after, and I won't give out my credentials right now. But I do believe that's how you respond to people, having robust conversations. And I like what Jacob pointed out, where if you get educated a little bit before you bring your information forward, it's helpful, not because it helps you understand that the person is listening to you. Because there's such a robust conversation happening with your elected officials, and they're hearing from so many multiple sides all of the time. So if you're educated on the material, they'll be able to have a conversation with you that says, hey, and these are the other 50 sides that I had to look at, and now let's talk about those and be open-minded. So great way to discuss with them.
Thank you, guys. Our next question is talking about about the growth of Utah Valley. What are some ways that we can plan, coordinate, and manage growth in Utah Valley?
I feel like I'm the only one talking. I know you guys have answers. So there is a lot of growth coming in, and I'll just talk about it from my own city's perspective, but a lot of growth is coming in, and it's building in the right place and at the right time and together. And so we always say we're doing smart city design, and smart city design allows you to build city centers with integrated living, offering a variety of different housing types that allows you to preserve open space and preserve agriculture. And I think as we can connect those silos of conversation of saying we have an affordable housing crisis, and there's a lot of people coming in on that side, we have land that we need to preserve, we have agriculture that's important to us. As we connect those silos, we can grow better together.
So to put some numbers on it, Davis County has about 45,000 developable acres right now. Salt Lake County has 55,000 developable acres, and Utah County has 255,000 developable acres. So if you're wondering where the growth is coming, it's here. And with that comes we need to be planning out ahead on our infrastructure. The legislators for this area, we meet together and we work really hard on trying to prioritize which infrastructure projects need to go forward and need to get funded, and that we kind of have to try to pull our weight to get that money into the infrastructure that we need. And so there's a lot that goes into planning for growth, because you're needing to have family sustaining jobs. You need to have an infrastructure that supports not just the growth, but the movement throughout the valley for that growth. And you need to have the type of infrastructure where you have an environmental, you have a quality of life that people still enjoy. Part of what we're trying to do with Utah Lake is to create an environment that people will enjoy, and we need to protect the lake. With that growth comes risk to the lake. And if we're not forward thinking on how we're managing that risk to the lake and how we're managing how people interact. We want people to interact with the lake. It's a wonderful asset that we've been treating like a liability for a long, long time. And so part of what we're trying to do is project out into the future. How are people going to be interacting with the lake? Are they doing so safely, and is it going to be a positive experience? And those are all things that we're trying to manage and plan for far into the future. The lake may be, it may be 100 years out before we get it to what anyone here is imagining in their minds. But we need to take those steps now to start moving the ball down the line, to take this wonderful resource and protect it and improve it.
Excellent. So along those lines of growth, we have a question about effluent and wastewater treatment. So they ask, what new wastewater treatment facilities are proposed or planned for around the north and west sides of the lake?
We have about 7 wastewater treatment plants that discharge either to Utah Lake or to tributaries that are very close to Utah Lake. Many of them upgrading right now. We have upgrades, very expensive upgrades going on in Provo City, Spanish Fork City, Payson City, Salem City just constructed a brand new facility. Timpanogos Special Service District is the largest in the valley. They serve 11 communities, I believe, in northern Utah County. Any growth that comes into the northern part of the county will connect to Timpanogos. In terms of the west side, we've got Eagle Mountain, which is a non-discharging facility, and we are working with Utah County to start talking about what the plan is for sewer on the southern and kind of southwest side of the lake as growth continues. We're tracking that quite closely, and as those upgrades occur, they're not only reducing nutrient loads, but they're also planning for growth.
Great, thank you, Erica. Another question that we have is, and this is a science-geared question, is how much do Utah Lake levels fluctuate, and how does this influence the harmful algal blooms on Utah Lake?
On average, from year to year, there's about a 2 to 3 foot variation in lake fluctuation. Some years we get up to 5 feet in fluctuation. According to the studies and current day realities, there seems to be algae blooms that can happen on low lake level or low runoff years because we've got evaporation taking place in the lake. High runoff years, we get a flushing event that clears nutrients from our riverbeds. And so algae are very, very well adapted over the billions of years that they've been on the planet. And so we have bloom responses to most of the variables. And the lake temperatures really don't change much from low lake to high lake. It's so shallow that it, generally speaking, represents ambient temperature of the summer. So
I just saw, and this is new data based on the satellite record, but there is a relatively strong correlation between lake level and likelihood of a bloom. So in Sinead Tate's master's thesis, which is available now on BYU's website, they found that about 30% of the variability, the likelihood of having a bloom, was associated with the level of the lake. So just like Eric said, you can have a high water year that still has a bloom, but it's more likely that you get a bloom during a low water year.
I would also add, when you say 2 feet of water level on the west side of the lake, that can be 250 yards of property. So on the west side, it fluctuates in size, just 2 feet. I mean, 6 inches can be 100 yards.
Thank you for that. One of the questions that came in is, what is the difference between the Utah Lake Commission and the Utah Lake Authority?
It's the last word.
So the Utah Lake Commission is an interlocal agency. And what that means is that it is a coalition of various cities, and they work together with their own jurisdiction to try to influence the lake. They don't actually have a lot of authority to do anything inside the lake, except for authority granted by other agencies. The Utah Lake Authority would be a body that is, it also has no taxing authority, the Lake Commission, and it also has no ability to bond, or it's kind of more of a coalition of volunteers, of volunteer government agencies to try to improve the lake. The Utah Lake Authority is a little bit different. It has a core mission that would be, number 1, improve the water quality. Number 2, improve the environmental aspects of the lake. Number 3, it would be to improve the recreational experience on the lake. And number 4, improve the economic opportunities on the lake. So, and it has the authority to do that within the boundaries of the lake. It also has some taxing authority so that you can have resources to it. Those are the primary differences. So if you needed to get equipment to care for the lake, and that equipment required a bond of some sort, the Utah Lake Authority would have a funding source to go out and get that bond and have the equipment to be able to do something with the lake. What we see is, up until now, I think we've got a long history of a lot of people who care about the lake and no one who has the authority or the ability to actually make a difference on the lake, or as much of a difference as we would like them to. I think the Lake Commission has done a wonderful job with the tools that they've been given, but we need a bigger shovel. That's, to care for this lake, we need a bigger shovel than what we have. And the Lake Authority is intended to be a bigger shovel.
Thank you. Another question that might end up going to Representative Brammer. Who makes the final decision to allow the Utah Lake Restoration Project to proceed? And how can the public be involved in that decision?
Sure. So that decision is made by, it's made by the EPA and it's made by the Department of Natural Resources. And so the Utah Lake Authority was never meant to be like a lake restoration project thing. It's actually meant to be flexible enough that whether that happened or didn't, there's someone who can make decisions and has authority and ability to do something better for the lake. It's agnostic towards that idea. So the Lake Restoration Project, because it has its permit application in to, I think it's DNR or
Forestry, Fire, and State Lands.
Yeah, it's Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. That's who will ultimately make the call on that. And that's, yeah. So, I don't know if you have something to add.
Yeah, Forestry, as I stated earlier, Forestry, Fire, and State Lands is currently reviewing that application and proposal. So at this time, we are the ones who would make the final decision on that.
And I just wanted to say, I believe this is true for Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, and I know it would be true for any exchanges under the Utah Lake Authority.
Can't hear you.
But there is also a requirement for approval for any leases or exchanges by the Legislative Management Committee. So theoretically, there is at some point the Utah legislature stepping in so that it's not simply bureaucratic bodies. But I will say, and again, this is sort of my shtick, that there is also significant consideration or maybe deliberation that would have to happen not only through administrative or legislative processes, but also theoretically by courts who will be interested in determining the exact boundaries of Article 20 of the Utah Constitution and of the state's public trust obligations. Right now, FFSL operates under Title 65A of the Utah Code, which says they can, give exchanges or leases as limited by the public trust, and the Utah Lake Authority bill would require that the Utah Lake Authority only act as authorized by the Utah Constitution. So what that means is very much, I'm confident, up for grabs.
Okay, our next question is, what lessons can we learn from the Great Salt Lake, or from Bear Lake, or from Lake Tahoe, other lakes in the Mountain West? What have we learned about management, science, or legal issues from these other lakes?
I think they're very different lakes than Utah Lake, is the first thing. Utah Lake is one of the, it is unique in its lake bed ownership for the state. That's a different thing. We went to the Supreme Court and fought for that, and that creates a very different dynamic. Additionally, Utah Lake's role within the larger water system is also very unique compared to a lot of the other lakes on it. And those are only a couple of the issues. I'm sure that if we sat here, we could go through a lot of really, it is a unique lake with both from a legal perspective as to its ownership and how it's treated, as well as from an ecological perspective.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I don't mean to steal Erica's line, but I've heard her say what we've learned about Utah Lake is it's different. And it's interesting, a study came out just a couple of weeks ago that compared Utah Lake to other large water bodies in the West. They found that Utah Lake had less intense algal blooms than the majority of lakes. It ended up in the lower quartile. So again, it's different, and we bring expectations to ecosystems. And so I've heard various people say, oh, we could make Utah Lake like Lake Tahoe on steroids. And that kind of thinking is extremely dangerous. That's not something that the lake is. We need to understand the system and then decide how can we best support an ecosystem that is good for all of the people and all of the non-human inhabitants of Utah as well.
I want to add too, I think lessons that we could learn probably need, I think I heard that this is like one of the biggest island projects that's being proposed, and it's not like anything in any of the lakes that you mentioned. So you'd probably have to go out and kind of recognize other areas that have gone through something similar. I think having these types of robust conversations and open forums like this really help that discussion about what we can learn. And I think hearing from the Lake Restoration Group later today probably will be fantastic, just to keep that conversation going and tie it in together, because I think that's where we're going to learn the most and kind of understand all of the sides so we can really understand the science behind it.
There is a wealth of scientific information on how shallow lakes like Utah Lake behave, and that's where we need to look to look for answers for how to restore lakes like Utah Lake. Utah Lake is a huge shallow lake. It's one of the biggest, so it's different for sure, but there is information out there on how to restore shallow lakes. They behave a lot differently than a deep lake like Lake Tahoe. So you have to keep that in mind and recognize that difference when we look at what Utah Lake can be.
Thank you, Chris. I think we have another question that we're going to pose to you. If we had a time machine, what should we have done differently 25 years ago as far as management of Utah Lake is concerned?
How about the carp thing? Well, let's go back to 1883 and not have the carp introduced.
I think there's been huge improvements made to Utah Lake in the past 25 years, just in terms of the level of interest. I started working on Utah Lake back in the mid-1990s. It had been neglected for decades and centuries, and the June Sucker Recovery Program really got off the ground, and we seemed to be the only game in town 25 years ago. Now we've got the Utah Lake Commission. We used to host a symposium every year similar to this right here at UVU, but we never got the interest and it eventually faded. And it's just really good to see the lake getting the level of interest it is now, because that means we're going places.
I think if we could go back in time, this year, thanks to the legislature, we've had $9.8 million appropriated to Utah Lake. And I think that's what I would do differently is if we could have had this kind of money that we're putting at Utah Lake this year, that could have changed what we're doing all along. The type of funding that we're receiving now could have really helped a long time ago. So I think it's important. I think that's the component that's been missing for a long time is putting money at Utah Lake.
Amen.
Okay, let me ask you this question. If we were to fast forward 25 years, what could we expect Utah Lake to look like? What do you want it to look like? What changes will we see in 25 years?
I would say, what are you going to see in 2 years? Walkara Way will be done in 2 years. And it's gonna, if you haven't been down to the pilot area, you need to come look at it. Like, our area is fantastic. In 2 years, it'll be from, Orem to Vineyard, and it'll be done. And it's a great showing of 25 government entities coming together to go through and do this. So it doesn't take that much time. And I know we're talking about the shoreline here, not talking about the water. That's going to take a long time. But yeah, it's looking good.
Yeah, but the reduction of those phragmites give back to the lake, and that's what that project's all about.
True.
I want to answer the opposite question. What wouldn't I want Utah Lake to look like in 25 years? And I think this really is connected to the development, the strategic development. And if we continue to just build suburban neighborhoods around the lake, then Utah Lake is going to be a traffic jam. And it's maybe going to be cut in half with the causeway. The disruption, the hydrological and ecological disruption of a causeway is enormous, right? One of our only ecological laws is nature knows best. That's also sometimes called the law of unintended consequences. When you change something fundamental about an ecosystem as large and powerful and important as Utah Lake, you cannot predict how that's going, what the effects will be. And so I really hope that we can work together as a community and say, okay, where are the people going to go? What kinds of vibrant communities do we want to create? And circling all the way back to the first business question, I think that there are lots of great examples of how we can have mixed development, some high density, some single family, that leads to great quality of life for families and people of all backgrounds.
Thanks. I'm going to push this question to Ben's neighbors, Ms. Meyer and Mr. Mabey. What do you want to see in 25 years at Utah Lake?
What do I want to see in 25 years? I want the lake to continue being a water storage feature. It supplies water not only directly to agricultural interests, like Saratoga Springs pumps directly out of the lake for their secondary system. I want to see the lake continue to provide water storage so that projects like the Jordanelle Reservoir can fill from the Provo River and supply water all along the Wasatch Front for drinking water. And so as the years progress, those features need to be protected. We need to maintain the lake as a water storage facility, and that's my main hope.
Could I add one thought? From our study, we've asked our science panel to answer the question of whether there could be an alternative future state that would flip the lake back to more of a clear lake, recognizing the shallow ecology nature of it. So it's a real question we need to answer is, do we just want to manage the lake to reduce the level of algal bloom to make it a little bit clearer and more safe for recreation, or is it our goal and is it possible to actually put back the macrophytes and the habitat and have the water quality support that type of ecology? So to me, that's an open question that we hope to be able to answer from a science perspective in the next couple of years? And then what are the management tools that would be needed to actually implement that would be the follow-up question. And that would be more than just a water quality connection. There's going to be the carp management, habitat restoration, perhaps management of lake levels if we actually want to achieve that goal. But I think that's an open question.
Okay. Chief Executive Meyer, do you want to comment on this one? What would you hope to see in 25 years?
Well, I would hope there's still a lake there, for one. That lake holds a lot of power that maybe you guys don't see. And it's a spiritual thing. And when you disturb stuff like that, you bring things on yourselves. And my hope is that it would be cared for prayerfully, and that it would be restored and not damaged. It's not a tourist attraction. It's a part of our culture and of everybody's here. And to destroy that is going to bring trauma. It's not a good thing. It needs protected and it needs cared for.
Thank you for sharing that. We've heard from a lot of different users and perspectives. How do we balance competing interests and a wide variety of diverse interests? How are we going to make that possible?
I think one of the hard parts that we have right now is if you want to do something involving the lake, who do you go to figure out whether or not you can? Or whether you should. There's no direct line as to who's in charge of the lake. And, you know, and so it's a little bit, in terms of balancing those interests, you know, that's the whole point of the Utah Lake Authority is to create an entity that receives the feedback, that makes the decisions, and that analyzes all the science that's, you know, that goes into the lake, that analyzes the cultural issues that go into the lake, and that makes decisions on that. Because right now, you know, the lake is at risk of having decisions made for it that we don't really know where they come from exactly. Whether it's from an administrative agency or whether it, you know, there's not a clear line as to who has the stewardship of the lake. And when there's not a clear designation of stewardship, we've seen a vacancy of stewardship. And that's really what we're talking about today is people have eschewed the responsibility for the lake. They all think, oh, that'd be great if somebody did something about it. And nobody knows exactly who's in charge of doing something about it. You know, and that's, you know, as far as, and when you know who's in charge of doing something about it, and if you've set up the structure correctly, then you can make sure that the interests are heard by those decision makers. I mean, that's the whole point of the Lake Authority.
I'll add to that too. I think one of the difficult things that I think happen in city government is when you really want something to happen and you fight for it, but in order to be collaborative, you have to just take all of the conflict head on. And when you have everybody standing in the room and none of them disagree, and then you're all collaboratively working together, you can come up with a solution that works best. And I think this kind of dates back a little bit to, let's talk about the Geneva plant. That Geneva plant, I'm in the process of cleaning it up, and we've done a really good job, and we're removing all of these hazards that have come from this. And I think that if we could all go back and say, hey, would we want this if we knew it was going to be a blight today? Many people would say no, but it fed a lot of the people in this community for a really long time. And most people worked there. And it helped during the war efforts, and it caused a lot of pollution and a lot of damage. And would we go back and have that be here? I don't know. Would the people that worked there and the lives that it fed and all of those things want it to go away? Probably not. Could I say it easily? Absolutely, because I'm in the middle of cleaning it up and, you know, getting yelled at when I'm trying to remove the dirt and people are smelling it, things like that. So I think it's true. It's my life right now. But I really think that if we face that conflict head on and we look at it together and we hear all sides and that robust conversation really comes out, we can say, okay, say we do need to get people around the lake somehow, and the causeway is a possibility of being harmful, but we've got millions of people coming in. How do we all get our heads in the same room, come together and say, okay, well, these are different options, and what's going to cause the least harm and allow us to live here? And I really believe that there's probably going to be a little bit of dissatisfaction, and probably more satisfaction if you work together collaboratively.
I've never sided on authority or none, but I will tell you my challenges with Walkara Way, which is, you know, Eric Ellis of the Lake Commission has been fantastic to work with. Like, he doesn't have a consistent budget. He doesn't have that means taxing authority. So when we go say, hey, we want to fix this, he has to go to every city and say, pretty please. And then that city gets to dictate, yeah, I'll do that in 2020 or I'll do it in 2040. And that doesn't work, especially if you're wanting to have a trail system that goes alongside the lake, and you have competing cities that can just pony up when they want to or when they don't. And you have Vineyard City that's right next to the lake that says, hey, the lake's really important to us because we live down here. And you have other cities that I'm not going to name that will say, yeah, we're getting to it sometime, right? Our most important attribute is X. And so, you know, as I've got into the issues, one of the things with Walkara Way was like, hey, I want to engage and I want to master plan a solution. And when we got to it, it was, oh, we have to go and ask pretty please for each of the 25 government entities. And so one of the things about why the Lake Authority appeals to me, and I don't go either way, but like if we in this room are saying, hey, we love the lake, okay, we haven't ponied up financially for it, and I don't care how that is, like what taxing, like sewer, water, whatever, but what is that funding mechanism? I hear a conflict today about, oh, private with the islands or government, and I think that's why we need to come together on what side of the argument, but like I love the conversation of, especially from Representative Brammer is I want an authority and I want an entity that can protect. Like as I went through with Walkara Way, I was like, protect the eagles, protect public access, protect wildlife. And each time Eric was like, yeah, I'm trying to do that. I don't have as much authority and I don't have a budget. And it's like, okay, and what he's been able to do is bring awareness to the problem. And so anyway, that's kind of my helping you understand where it was and why I think there's this movement to go, okay, maybe we should do an authority. I think it's a serious consideration of like, okay, if you guys all want to do it, let's think how we're going to fund it.
I do, in this vein, just want to express my own maybe personal skepticism that centralizing government authority and bureaucratic structures that don't necessarily have obligated, transparent processes is not always going to be ideal. If it were the case that a central authority were to make smart management decisions, it would be great, but there's just greater risk. The fewer stakeholders that are engaged, because there are fewer processes that have to happen, the fewer ideas that are going to be floated. If the purpose of the authority is to, you know, garner public comment and engage people, that's one issue, but it's a totally different issue for the authority to be, I mean, quite literally authorized to make essentially plenary decisions about the lake. I think that in many cases in government, splitting up decision-making into multiple bodies, into multiple processes, forces deliberation and makes things slower, but it demands maybe more rigorous thinking and ultimately results in better ideas. I think this is why we split our House and our Senate. I think this is why we force legislatures to undergo so many processes and committees, because sometimes decentralized decision-making, even if slower, is smarter.
Isn't that excellent? Thank you for that. So we need to wrap up. This is the end of our panel, and I am so personally appreciative to each of you for coming today, for lending your time and expertise. This is a genuine collaborative process, and we appreciate your integrity and your interest in communicating and sharing your knowledge. So let's give them a round of applause.